Welcome to Waterside Chat, hosted by the Marine Fish Conservation Network. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. We hear how ocean policy impacts them, their communities, and their coastal ways of life. And now, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon. As Colin said, it's today's Waterside Chat. I am Tom Sadler, the network's deputy director, and I am delighted to welcome my good friend Bob Rees, a fishing guide extraordinaire, the executive director of the Northwest Guides and Anglers Association, and a Northwest Sport Fishing Industry Association board member. Today, we're going to be talking about salmon, habitat, clean water, climate change, and I think we'll find a little time to maybe squeeze a few tactics and tips out of Bob at the end. So I'm looking forward to it. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate you having me on, Tom, and members of the Marine Fish Conservation Network, a group of folks that I've worked with for many years, paying close attention to marine resource issues here in the Pacific Northwest. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for making the time to be with us today, Bob. So you're a longtime and well-known fishing guide in the Pacific Northwest. Fishing guides are, as Kirk Dieter likes to say, the boots in the water, the boots on the deck. You have the direct knowledge of changes in the waters that we all enjoy fishing in. More than today, I think more than anything else, that firsthand knowledge is critical to fisheries management, to policy making, and as guides, both of us as guides, we know that makes our clients happy. So help me out here, Bob. I'm an East Coast guy. I have told you on more than one occasion that I don't have a good reference point for what goes on in the Pacific Northwest. So give me the salmon landscape, or what's the fishing scene in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, you bet. And just a little more background on me. I think, I kind of cut my teeth on learning about the outdoors in Pennsylvania. Nobody else in my family fishes. And so my experience in the outdoors was going back to visit Grandma and Grandpa in Pennsylvania, Bradford, Pennsylvania. And Grandpa and Grandma taking us out and seeing the white-tailed deer in the fields at night, taking hikes through the woods and seeing the wild turkey, fishing the trout streams back there. And I was as a sixth-generation Oregonian in the first grade, I was literally pricing motorhomes in the first grade, because as soon as I got my driver's license, I'm buying myself a motorhome and I am headed to Pennsylvania. So.
Indeed.
And then the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife had come out with this poster. I remember it fairly vividly. I had it in my bedroom, which I'm at my folks' house right now. They're elderly. That's why I'm a little bit disheveled right now. I'm taking care of them as Dad just got out of hip surgery. But just in the next door room here, I had a poster with red ink on it that showed all the different fish and wildlife species in Oregon. And as soon as I realized what we had here, I canceled my order in the first grade for the motorhome, and I was going to stay put and truly create a continuing legacy in Oregon. So my daughter's now a seventh generation Oregonian. But yeah, it's a unique place to be. Oregonians are very proud of to live here. We have a deep appreciation for our fish and wildlife resources. Several folks on this call are integrated into it. I see Norm Ritchie here with the Steelheaders. I have just been so fortunate to be mentored by people such as Norm on different fishery issues. Norm is a leader in the National Wildlife Federation. And, again, like partners with like the Marine Fish Conservation Network, very few organizations have the resources they need to pay attention to all the different fishery and natural resource issues that face outdoorsmen and outdoors women here across the nation. And so having the kind of collaboratives that we have available to us as nonprofits is an incredible resource that has really benefited sportsmen and sportswomen again across the nation. And so really fortunate to be part of that. I was schooled in fisheries. I have a degree in fisheries technology, but there's just something about folks like us that are on this call that have a thirst for understanding what are the issues that face fish and wildlife in our nation, and how do we integrate ourselves into helping solve those issues. Part of the reason why we started the Guides Forecast, I think we have some Guides Forecast members here on this call today, was originally to activate sportsmen and women to help direct policymakers, engage policymakers to create a pathway forward for recovery for salmon and steelhead. Things have changed, in just 1 or 2 generations. To see the dramatic changes that we've seen in fish and wildlife resources in just 1 or 2 generations is frankly a crime of nature. And again, thankfully, different organizations are addressing some of these issues. And salmon, of course, is an iconic species, is a keystone species. It has a disproportionate amount of benefit to our ecosystem versus other species. That's the definition of keystone species. And we'll to the day we die, we'll fight for their recovery. And we spend countless days on the sidelines right now. Spring Chinook salmon, the most fabled salmon that swims on planet Earth, certainly the most tasty, is swimming up right through Portland, right past Portland Airport right now. And we're sitting on the sidelines. We're not fishing on them because we have to adhere to regulation under the Endangered Species Act. But even more so that, we're giving up millions and millions in revenue, incredible opportunities with our families to fish on these species, because we want to see them survive the long haul. And the trajectory is not going in the right direction. So again, with salmon, it's a cold water species. We're losing a lot of cold water refugia. And so we've been fighting the Snake River dams for nearly 3 decades. Again, a lot of partners on this chat with us have carried the flag. We just lost Walt McGovern. He was a member of the Steelheaders, and he's the one that got steelhead listed as a sport fish under Governor Tom McCall probably 40 or 50 years ago. And so steelhead are no longer a commercially sought after species. We still haven't recovered them, but it was a step in the right direction. So we're losing these change agents, and we are in desperate need of new blood, new energy, new people to enter into these conversations so that we do have a future for fish.
So, well, thanks for that intro. It's I'm going to come back to a little bit more about Bob Rees, but let me focus, because you've started a good conversation or good comments on salmon. Sort of give me a primer on how did we get to the situation where salmon, I don't want to prejudge this. How do we get to the situation today from where it was? I don't know, is 50 years reasonable, 100 years reasonable to say what's changed, that it's sidelining anglers, and of course the obvious of there's progress, but there's also we're an intelligent human species. We should be able to figure this out. So sort of take us back and then bring us forward to where we are today. Is that reasonable? And
yeah,
and I'll jump in maybe and pick on sort of what the influencers are in that. But let's start with a primer on how did we get where we are today.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Tom, and sadly, it's pretty easy to answer. It used to be that we could default to ignorance. We didn't know what the decimation capacity for hydropower would be on wild stocks of salmon. So back, 70, 80, 90, 100 years ago, it's like, oh, the dams will create energy, will build the Northwest. That's exactly what they did. And, we have to recognize the value of that. But it also sent wild salmon and steelhead plummeting into where we're at now, which is 13 listed species of salmon and steelhead in the Columbia Basin alone. And so it used to be hatcheries will solve our problems. Well, after decades and decades of inbreeding and diminishing returns on hatchery fish, we now know that's not the solution. There's been billions of dollars poured into salmon recovery, yet we have not recovered salmon. So we're past the point of ignorance. And now it's time for folks to step in and to get organized, which our organizations help with that, and be foot soldiers. That's the reason we're currently in our position, is because we do not have enough political pull, and that's changing. Granted, it's a lot better now than it was 10, even 20, especially 20 years ago. But we're showing up in force, and it's something to really be proud of. People are showing up to have these conversations with the federal government on dam breaching. There's a conversation later today at 5 o'clock to talk about the Columbia River Treaty and how. So here's just an example. Like, the federal government is bringing together interest to renegotiate the treaty with Canada on how we deal with the massive Columbia River Basin.
Mhm.
A third of the water comes from Canada, 2/3 from the United States, the Pacific Northwest. So the two factors that they're bringing to the table about how to have conversations about the Columbia River Treaty is, what are the energy needs and what are the flood control measures that we need to keep in place and negotiate between the two countries to make sure everybody's needs met. Well, what's the grossly missing component to that? Well, it's ecological function. Why are
Uh-huh.
we not having conversations on the ecological integrity of the Columbia River system and how we work with Canada to ensure that we have a future for salmon and all the ecological benefits that go along with that? Many times over the course of my guiding career have I told this story, and thank God I wasn't here to witness it firsthand. I would have committed hara-kiri. But the 100-pound salmon that used to exist, Chinook salmon known as June hogs, that used to exist on the Columbia River, beating their heads against Grand Coulee Dam because they no longer had access to their historical spawning grounds. This is the damage we've created. We're never going to get back 100-pound salmon on the Columbia River. They're gone forever. Extinction is forever. And, we're trying to hold on to a remnant run of fish, not because it's not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's the only way these fish are going to survive. We don't have the hatchery genetics to perpetuate this run of fish into the future. We need those wild genetics intact. They're the ones that are most likely to survive climate change, most likely to still ride out the hot waters that are forecasted ahead for these watersheds. And so creating this army of advocates is absolutely critical right now. And we're on a pathway of doing that.
So, couple of things in there. Let me start where you just ended, on the political clout, creating an army of advocates. How's that going? How do you feel like you're what did you call it? The June hog, banging your head against the Coulee Dam? Or do you feel like there's progress being made? And if so, how is that being made? How is that progress being made?
I get sidetracked. I started to tell a story about why the guides forecast was created about 25 years ago. Our weekly newsletter goes out to about 8,000 subscribers, and it was originally free, and we built numbers over the years, and we put out a forecast, a fishing report, and a forecast. And people were really appreciative of that. And so, part of the reason I did that is to actually create this army of advocates. This is 25 years ago. I was fairly disappointed that we didn't get those people to show up to the Board of Forestry meeting. They were consuming the information. Of course, my idea being get more people invested in this incredible resource. And of course, they'll become advocates like I did. But I'm in a different kind of cookie cutter mold in the sense that my job directly relies on healthy, abundant salmon and steelhead runs. Other folks have jobs to raise their families and soccer games to go to, and that sort of thing. So, there's a lot of distractions out there, and people that are able to engage on these issues are a lot of times retired. I mean, even folks in my own community, in the fishing guide community, it really takes some arm stretching, some arm wrenching to get them engaged and join me walking the halls of Congress or the halls of Salem to make the changes here. It's disappointing, but nonetheless, there are still a good handful of people that are showing up for these. We still have to kind of professionally organize, get people to turn out, kind of guide them through the process, how to sign up, how to testify. So that's not disappointing. They're showing up. So it has changed over the decades. And I want to credit people for that for sure. And we just have to continue to do that. And again, people have busy lives and a lot of distractions. But I'm encouraged. I see Spicy's guide service on here as well. He's been very interested in joining some of these conversations. I do have members that continually step up to be part of it, and we just need to continue to have more of that. So it is going in the right direction, but it is there's so much. I mean, this is really the reason why we're in this spot is we weren't paying attention to these issues 60, 70, 80 years ago. There was a small group of people who said this is going to cause problems in the future, but we just we were building America, and now we're in a good place infrastructure wise, but our salmon and steelhead, especially in the face of climate change, are definitely headed in the wrong direction.
Well, we'll get to climate change in a bit. I want two things. One is in terms of advocates. One of the things that I tell folks that I guide with is being an advocate is a lot like being a fisherman. You have to keep doing it to get success. It's not a one and done, and it's not something you learn overnight. And so if you want to learn to fish, you have to put some time in. So as you say, the education. And then if you want to catch fish, you have to go where the fish are. And, that sometimes means going to Salem or going to Washington, D.C. or what have you. So, I think we're lucky, Bob, as the audience that we're trying to energize as advocates understand that part of the fishing analogy. Let me talk a little bit about economics here. Obviously, the conversation around putting in dams for hydropower, but there was also dams for irrigation. And have you seen in the work that you're doing up there? And I want to hear more about the Oregon forests and the clean and the importance of that clean water thing. But I don't want to jump too far off here. But what the old maxim of whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting has been going on as long as long before I was around. So tell me a little bit about the economic dynamics out there.
Yeah, and so it put simply, the Snake River dams provide about four different benefits for our communities, and flood mitigation is not really one of them, but they provide energy, they provide transportation for barging, so there's a cheap, economical way for farmers to get their grain to port. They provide irrigation, and they provide recreation, and so those issues are solvable. And because this issue has been worked on for so long, we actually have those solutions basically in our hand. We can extend pipes for irrigation. We can move to rail and truck if need be to get grain to port. It wouldn't be as economical as barging. But what we can't do is we can never return wild salmon genetics to their historical spawning and rearing grounds. Once they're gone forever. There's no remedy for that. And so that's why it's so critical that we make these changes now. And there's such a big push going on now. And there is some changes being made. I mean, one of the reasons why we're having engaging talks with the Biden administration, because every time we take them to court for a bad biological opinion on the Columbia River, we win. We've won 5 times in court against the federal government. Doesn't matter who's in the executive branch. We win because we're right and under the Endangered Species Act. And so we just need to make that final push. All the science is saying, if we do not remove those Snake River dams, we will in fact lose that iconic run of fish, a run of fish that historically provided, probably close to 70% of the entire Columbia Basin's return. Historically, we saw between 15 and 17 million wild salmon make their way up the Columbia River pre-European development. Now, in a good year, we may have 2 million salmon, of which about 80% of them are hatchery fish.
Yeah.
So we're at about 3% of historical abundance for wild salmon. That is not sustainable.
No, and so when I talk about the economics and being a fishing guide myself, I mean, it is I appreciate the importance of being economically being able to supply foodstuffs in an economic way. I get that. I understand the importance of having and economically feasible power generation. But if you say, okay, we're going to pick between our children of which ones are going to survive, the recreational angler, and by virtue of that, the recreational guiding industry takes it in the shorts. Is that unfair to say?
Oh, that is spot on. And as a matter of fact, I mean, credit our good friend Republican. Why did I just brain fart his name away? The gentleman from Idaho, who's really in the heat of. Thank you, Mike Simpson.
Mike Simpson has been a champion on this stuff.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so he's the one that's spent his chief of staff. I think his office is surrounded with notes on how to recover Snake River salmon.
I think his chief of staff just went to work for Trout Unlimited.
I think you're right. I heard that. Yes. And so here's a guy who understands the economics. I mean, his constituents are the outfitters and guides of Riggins, Idaho. And they're like, we're dying on the vine here. I mean, we have it pretty tough here in the lower Columbia, but those guys in Riggins, Idaho, they've got nothing to fish for. Their steelhead numbers are in the toilet. Their salmon numbers are in the toilet. I mean, those guys are dying on the vine. And so here we have a bipartisan solution to this crisis, and we just got to keep pushing forward. So yes, absolutely. Economics, salmon and steelhead in the Columbia Basin between Oregon, Washington, Idaho is over a $3 billion a year industry when things function. And we've seen what recovery looks like. It was 2001 when we had a bumper crop of salmon, spring chinook come back to the Columbia River system, about 450,000. A couple different things happened, and we had the floods in 1996, which sent all those baby salmon to sea over the top of the dams instead of through the turbines. So they had high survival rate in the river, and then they met unprecedentedly productive ocean conditions offshore, kind of like what we had in 2021, and their survival rates were off the charts. So this year's return is about 200,000 at Columbia. We had about 250,000 in 2001, and the fishing was like nothing I've ever seen before or after that. There was a 3-day, people who spring chinook fish here on this call know how many hours it takes to catch a salmon. We put in 3.5 days on the lower Columbia during prime season here a couple weeks ago and caught two salmon over a 3.5 day period. And that was not terrible. But there was a 3-day window in 2001 fishing up at Bonneville Dam where we landed 47 spring chinook in 3 days, 30 hatchery and 17 wilds that we let go. You had just dropped your bait down to the bottom and you were hooked up like that. We can have that again. We can even have better fishing than that if we do the right things with the hydropower system on the main stem.
And doesn't it lead you to think that there is a that I'll draw a line here. If you can, if you used to be able to catch 47 fish and now you catch 3 in the same period of time, people are going to stop doing this, right? And that's a casualty of our not paying attention to the fact that this species is winking out. And you can argue whether that's good or bad, but there is a clear economic impact on that. I know I'm coming back to the same point, but it argues that there has to be recognition of that adverse impact that it's having on the recreational guiding community, the recreational angling community. And then we have the moral imperative to just not go around killing for the sake of doing it, because we feel like it's more important to do something else. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but if that's the view I'm taking on this.
Yeah, and it is a phenomenon, I mean, the joke back in 2001 is a guy couldn't buy a bag of ice or a bag of potato chips anywhere up and down the Columbia River Gorge because every fisherman had all those already purchased. We got a taste for what that was like. There's this phenomenon called shifting baseline. I mean, I'm old enough now to remember exactly what happened in 2001. You don't forget 47 springers in 3 days. Not as long as it takes to catch one of those things. But, I've already grown accustomed to going back to the crappy times like this year where it takes 3 days to catch 2 salmon. So, this shifting baseline, people, you hear the old timers, I'm getting to be there myself. This is how it was in the old days, but this is how it is now. And, how are we going to get back to the good old days? Because we know scientifically it's possible to do. Socially, it's important to do. Politically, it's a heavy lift. And so that's, again, where we come in.
So tell me, let's switch gears for a second. Go back to when I was doing some research, came across the Oregon Forest Program. Talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so that's great, Tom. And again, it's something that, and I wouldn't have the breadth of knowledge I do unless I didn't have a keen interest in it. And, one of the first boards that I jumped on their advisory body was as like a rural residential streamside buffer zone ordinance advisory committee, something like that. We were tasked to come up with an ordinance to protect riparian areas and rural residential areas in Tillamook County, the land of many waters. So there's plenty of waterways to protect in Tillamook County. So I got a lot of blowback for representing fish in that conversation, like you're taking away private property rights. And so it was a tight rope to walk. And, I'm all for people being able to utilize their own property as they pay taxes on and how they want to. But it has ramifications, and we were well on our way. So in 96, I had started my guide business in 1996. In a matter of 10 years, in a matter of a decade, anglers on the North Coast lost what I call consumptive access, meaning we couldn't keep 5 of the 6 species of wild salmonids that were on the North Coast at that time. In a matter of 10 years, we lost consumptive access to wild cutthroat trout, wild chum salmon, wild steelhead, wild coho salmon, and wild spring chinook. That left only fall chinook. Wild fall chinook was the only species that was still abundant enough for us to catch and keep. Everything else had to be fin clipped, had to be hatchery, or was closed altogether. And so losing over 80% of your product as a professional fishing guide is somewhat of an alarming situation. And it made me think, I knew when I shifted from working for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to becoming a fishing guide, it was a bit of a dangerous precedent I was setting for myself. I was becoming reliant on a natural resource. And here in my first 10 years of starting a business, 80% of my product was gone, didn't have access to. So I started digging into what is the common denominator here? What is the root problem? Why are we losing these wild runs of fish? And again, it comes down to water quality. And all we were ever taught in fisheries technology, which is really fish husbandry, is how much water temperature directs the health and well-being of cold water species such as salmon, steelhead, and trout. And so I learned, again, it was an awkward hobby of mine, but I learned about the water quality on the North Coast in these forests that were maturing. I mean, it's hard to call them maturing. They were only 40 and 50 years old when historically forests on the North Coast were hundreds and hundreds of years old. So we were seeing lethal water temperatures. As a matter of fact, every major river system on the North Oregon coast, which still has a pretty robust forest on it, they're young stanza forest, now 70 and 80 years old, but it fails under the DEQ's, Department of Environmental Quality's, what they call the 303D list. It fails to meet the minimum water temperature standards for the spawning and rearing of wild fish. And so our juvenile salmonids, so here's the common denominator. So cutthroat trout, steelhead, and coho salmon, as well as adult spring chinook, all have to reside in our freshwater ecosystems during the summer months. And so those fish were either dying because of warm, lethal water temperatures, or they were severely compromised during a period of the year where they should be putting on copious amounts of weight. I mean, you don't have a lot of weight in a juvenile fish, but they were supposed to be living their best life during the summer months when the insect hatches were going on, and the torrential river systems weren't taking them downstream or burning all the calories they had on their fragile bodies. They should have been putting weight on. In fact, they were dying because the water temperatures were too warm. Those that weren't dying were all crammed into small cold water refugia areas, such as smaller stream mouths that weren't as compromised from a temperature standpoint. But ironically, I lived in Tillamook County, home of Tillamook cheese and ice cream and yogurt and everything else that's still residing on my body. You put a herd of cows, you put a herd of 50 head on a 1 acre patch of grass, and it's not going to go well for them. No. The same thing is happening with the fish in the forest system, ecosystems. You heard, 500 smolts, juvenile salmon or steelhead into a small portion where they can survive. The only place they can survive because the only dissolved oxygen in the watershed is with the cold water, and they're not going to do well in a period when they should be thriving. They were dying. So lethal summer water temperatures affects those fish, most of those runs of species that we were losing on a regular basis. That's why we are fighting so hard for better forest practices. And we've made some incredible strides in the recent 2 years. We've got the private forest accords that we worked hard on that addresses private forest lands. But, the fact of the matter is most of the North Coast is made up of Oregon state forestry lands. Mm-hmm. These are public lands. This is how the public should deem them for management. And yes, we want timber harvest off the forest lands. They provide important revenues to the tax base, taxing districts, they call it, whether it's the school system or the fire department, the college, that goes on and on. That's an important source of revenue for those rural counties. But we also want them to function for fish because, as you've identified several times, Tom, fish are economics, and fish, yes. Wild salmon, steelhead on the North Coast are a forest product too. And that product historically fueled an incredible troll fishery off the Oregon coast, no longer. It produced a robust sport fishing economy in a shoulder season. We weren't coming down there to fish Tillamook Bay in July and August, when all the tourists are there. leaving their money in those rural communities. We were coming down in October, November, and December when
Right.
all the other tourists are gone, and not anymore. For the second year in a row now, on that last product, the wild fall Chinook that I mentioned, we have lost consumptive access to fall Chinook 2 years in a row on Tillamook Bay, and the fishery is going to be closed for the second time in 2 years. We're not going to have this fishery that brought incredible numbers of people down to fish for these. Historically, they used to be 40 and 50 pounders. Now they're 20 and 30 pounders. And it's no longer a fishery. It's no longer an option. It's going to be closed again for the second year in a row. Again, because of water quality. Typically, fall Chinook, because they don't oversummer in the watershed, they don't perish during those lethal summer months of especially mid-July to mid-August is when the hottest temperatures exist, frequently over 72, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Around a 12-hour period from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. is when most of the damage is being done. But those fall Chinook are in the estuaries, so they're in the cooler ocean water as juveniles. But we're losing this consumptive opportunity for fall Chinook because in 2019 we had a massive die-off. About 50% of the spawning population of adults perished on the North Coast, and particularly in the Tillamook Basin, because of a condition called cryptobia, which affects the freshwater leeches, which attach themselves to the gills and the bodies of these salmon. And they died in November because of low warm water that perpetuated this cryptobia and killed half of our spawning stock. So we're now facing the effects of poor water quality in the fall, which historically has not been the case. And that's why we're not having a fall run fishery this year.
So let me see if I followed this correctly. So in that watershed that you were talking about, Tillamook watershed, you had 5 species that you could have were consumptive, however you called it. It went down to 1, and now you're losing that 1. And yet, that's Oregon forest land, and there is a legitimate reason to pull product off that forest land, whether it's timber or what have you. But the product that fuels the economic activity of the recreational angler and the recreational angling community, the guides and the equipment and all that are being destroyed, essentially. And maybe I'm overstating it, but how it feels, without recognition of the economic value that they bring to the table. Is that unfair to say?
Yeah, no, you hit it spot on there. That's a great summary. Just a clarification, we had access to 6 runs.
Okay.
We have a spring run and a fall run of Chinook. So that makes up, it's 5 species, but 6 runs of wild salmonids. So yes, fall Chinook used to be the stable wild population that we got to fish on. And now, yeah, you're right.
But you'd already lost 5 other runs.
Yes. And fortunately, because of the work of the good people of the state of Oregon, we have recovered some very limited opportunity for wild coho salmon and some limited opportunity for wild cutthroat trout, but still no wild spring Chinook, no wild chum salmon, no wild steelhead. And we have access to some hatcheries, some very small runs of hatchery fish for those other species, but no wild consumptive fishery. Yeah. And so
I'm going to put my personal prejudices on the table. And when it comes to hatchery fish, if you're using hatchery fish, you've failed. I understand the value occasionally and in limited situations, but as a general, if the answer is, well, we'll just make hatchery fish, you failed. not you, Bob Rees, has failed, but the process has failed. The regime has failed. So, the Oregon Forest Campaign, who's running that one? Who's the big player in that?
Yeah, and just let me just counter your prejudice. Although I certainly agree with you, but if we didn't have hatchery fish in the Pacific Northwest, we'd lose 85% of our opportunity here.
No,
So,
I get it. I get it, but it wasn't like that 100 years ago.
exactly.
So-
Yep. And so just as if, we're talking about dams or we're talking about the Marine Fish Network, Conservation Network, we are talking about a network of organizations that are working on forest practices here in the Pacific Northwest. And the Association of Northwest Steelheaders, the Northwest Guides and Anglers Association, the Wild Salmon Center, the Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity, the coalition list goes on and on. And it comes down to this: is that the forest industry recognized that the people of Oregon, if we had put a ballot initiative in front of them, that things wouldn't go very well for timber industry. We have enough talking points. We have enough sound scientific evidence of the damages that have occurred because of unchecked regulation. The logging industry used to cite the landmark Forest Practices Act, which was landmarked back in 1975. Doesn't work anymore. The science has been upgraded. We know what fish need, and so the political winds were in our favor when we came together under Governor Brown to work with the private timber industry to chart a pathway forward that is more friendly to fish. And a lot of credit goes to the Wild Salmon Center and Bob Van Dyke for the people that did that. And we're going to ride those winds for as long as we can to try and change the trajectory. Again, I'll cite simple scientific fact: 3% of historical abundance for wild salmonids in the state of Oregon, and we're one of the better Western states.
I know it's scary. It's scary. So I'm cognizant of the time. I want to do two things. I promised in the promo to this that we talk a little bit about the successes. Pick your favorite success that you've been party to or you want to celebrate, and tell us what it was.
Oh man.
Or don't pick, just take anyone. Doesn't have to be your favorite.
Can we really define success while we're sitting here on the sidelines when we can't fish for salmon on the main stem Columbia? So the failures far outnumber the successes. I would just say, Tom, the fact that we have 24 people, I'm not wearing my glasses here, 24 people joining us in on this conversation. That's been one of the most rewarding things of my 30-year career, is actually seeing my dream of creating an army of advocates that will step into these conversations and join us in the halls of Congress and down in Salem in the committee meetings. And man, it's heartwarming to see. I was at a budget Ways and Means meeting in Newport, Oregon last Friday. I didn't get a chance to sign up and testify because the room was packed full of people testifying.
That's awesome.
Oh, it's incredible.
That is a success.
It's clicking, and so having these great folks on this call, and you'll get to spread this out as well as me. Hopefully they see that there are people that can help spearhead and direct folks that don't have the time to do all the research and travel to different places. There's always a way for somebody to engage on these issues, even a simple email to a legislator or to the Board of Forestry. In this case, there's ways to engage, and people are starting to do it. So that just, and working with people that continue to teach me how to do it better is the success here.
So before I forget, somebody wants to join the Army or to be more active and get on the tip of the spear in the army of advocates, where do they go?
Yeah, and there's Several different organizations. We have a website, Northwest Guides and Anglers Association.
So go
Folks can
slow.
join.
Northwest Guides and Anglers Association.com.org.
Yeah, .org. Yeah. I mean, if you
.org.
Google it, I think it's nwguidesandanglers.org. That's an option. The Association of Northwest Steelheaders is a great resource. The Northwest Sport Fishing Industry Association, another great option, nsiafishing.org. And then, of course, the Marine Fish Conservation Network. Sign up for their newsletter. I do some blogging for the Conservation Network, and
we appreciate it.
And they got a full-time lobbyist that is walking the halls of Congress on behalf. We didn't touch much on saltwater opportunity. We don't have to talk a whole lot about saltwater opportunity because we have some, and we have a fairly intact council here in the Pacific Northwest that does good things for the most part for fish. And lingcod fishing's been great offshore. We've recovered lingcod. We're a bit of a success story when it comes to saltwater opportunity here in the Pacific Northwest. There's other councils across the nation that, how close is that bottle of whiskey you talk about?
Yeah.
So, fortunately, where our saltwater regulations are getting more liberal over the years, we have more opportunity to access deep reef now than we have in the last 2 decades. And so we're going in the right direction. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but that's, credit organizations such as the Marine Fish Conservation Network for paying attention to those issues and promoting those kind of opportunities for us.
That's kind of you to say, Bob.
True story.
So Peter had a question in the chat. I'll read it since some people listening to this won't be able to read it. It's with Northwest Steelheaders, CCA, Wild Salmon Center, and other groups involved in this, I'm assuming the fight for salmon, how can we better unite and have influence?
Yeah, and I mean, it starts with just signing up for information, and over time, you will see the opportunities pop up. I think all those organizations have action alerts, and it gives you a chance to engage. For folks that want to take it a step further, you can email me simply at brees, BREES @pacifier.com. And I will certainly alert you to the opportunities that are forthcoming to fight for these fish. So lots of ways to engage. I think a simple start is to sign up for most of these organizations have free newsletters you can get. We certainly have one at the Guides Forecast too. When something's really important, I mean, I think, again, going back to those successes, I sent out an email asking for our subscribers of the Guides Forecast to sign a petition asking for a robust habitat conservation plan, specifically Alternative 3, which gives the greatest benefit to riparian areas on the North Coast stream systems. And I had what I would call an overwhelming response of people chiming in, put my name on that petition. And here's some other comments. You got to do the right thing for fish. I mean, my heart just warmed with the response that came from that. So if you're a subscriber to the Guides Forecast, we also have a free version of our newsletter. We will let you know as far as fish advocacy goes, what the really important stuff is to do. But those other organizations I mentioned, definitely worth your time as well.
For sure. And Peter, I think the other thing is that it's important to do it, but it's also important to spread the news. And so, if you've got fishing buddies, say, hey, have you done this? Have you signed up for this? Did you see this action alert? Did you do it? I know it's probably sounds silly, but when you're sitting over coffee with a friend and say, hey, did you do this? Take the 5 minutes to tell your friend and tell your friend to take the 5 minutes to do it, and then have him or her tell their friend to do it. It's that multiplier effect that can really be helpful. And it takes that peer-to-peer pressure or engagement that really helps.
Yeah, well said, Tom.
So a couple of comments in the chat. One said offshore Chinook fishery not good. we'll take that. And then Save Our Wild Salmon is a great source for information and sign-on possibilities. We'll put some of this information or much of this information in the chat. I am cognizant of the time, so I want to say thank you, Bob. Really appreciate. Oh, I know. Let's reward some of the folks with what is Bob Rees's best fishing tip?
A couple things, and I'm trying to look at the date. I think we're on the 19th already. I got a 55th birthday in 2 days. So
holy mackerel! Well, I will spare you singing, but I will wish you a very happy birthday, young man.
I'm more worried about getting the AARP literature in the mail than anything.
Take advantage of it. Take my word for it. There's some good deals in it.
But oh my gosh! And now I forgot kind of what the question was.
Where are we best fishing? Give me your best fishing tip. The insider dope, man. Give us the data.
We're supposed to be. I've been writing this newsletter for over 2.5 decades, and so I pay very close attention to statistics. Statistically, we're supposed to be in the throes of the peak season of the Willamette River spring Chinook fishery. This year, we're supposed to have a run of over about 70,000 returning adults, which is a pretty good return for.
Yeah.
Granted, we plant 5.5 million hatchery fish to get 70,000 back.
Right.
Don't do the math on that. It's a pretty poor return on investment. But when the Willamette does clear, we're going to have some really good fish in there. Now, Captain Spicy, who's on here, he caught the biggest of 3 fish for the St. Helens Derby the other day in pretty dirty water in the Portland Harbor. Hopefully you get a chance to check out his YouTube video. But
all right, hang on. Give us a little bit more on where's the YouTube video, Captain Spicy.
Yeah, I think if you Google Captain Spicy St. Helens Salmon Derby, you will find his. He's got about 5 or 6 minutes of great video of the big spring Chinook he caught right in the Portland Harbor, and it's a pretty cool video and a wonderful fish. These spring Chinook. I didn't even go into why spring Chinook are so incredible, but great fish, great video. And so, with that Willamette's going to just be a signature fishery right here running through downtown Portland that folks, unfortunately, not a lot of bank fishing opportunity, but if you have a boat, some bank fishing opportunity at Meldrum Bar up by Oregon City. And those guys will certainly catch a bunch of fish this spring. If we do, in fact, get 70,000 returning adults back to the system in another week from now, when the Willamette should be clear, we're going to have some knockdown, drag out fishing. So make your next vacation out west here, Tom. And then another thing I'll just mention briefly is, because so many people are focused on these spring Chinook here in the Willamette Valley, they don't go down to the coast so much. We're on the very tail end of the winter steelhead run, but there can be some fantastic April fishing for steelhead and virtually nobody else on the river system, which is a very unique opportunity for those that not just have drift boats. A lot of the fish are in the upper reaches of these North Coast systems like the Siletz, the Trask in particular, the Wilson and the Stucca, 4 great options, even the upper Kilchis. Great options to catch wild steelhead, some hatchery fish available on those systems. April is still a great month to do it and just getting the very tail end, but to have a whole river system to yourself and catching some pretty magnificent steelhead is a pretty unique opportunity.
All right, well, there you have it. There's the tip from the man. There's the tip from the man. Bob, I really appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Well, I can't express my appreciation enough for what you guys do at the network there. And Rob Vandermark, he was on here. I'm not sure he's still on here now. So such great leadership. Joe Knight, corrects me in all my failed added opportunities. And of course, Colin keeps track of a lot of things at HQ. So thanks for you guys having such an incredible organization and allowing me to be a part of it.
Well, we're delighted, and you're always been one of our most helpful supporters and part of our policy council, and we greatly appreciate it. As I mentioned at the start, this chat will be available soon on YouTube and Facebook as a podcast. I would ask, if you've enjoyed it, that you please share it with your friends and colleagues. We certainly will be sharing it. If you want to stay up to date on the activities of the network and make sure you know about all the upcoming Waterside chats, sign up for our free email list. We'll put that link in the show notes. Our next Waterside chat, we have a twofer this month, will be on April 26th and my guest will be Eric Brazier, who is the Deputy Director of the Gulf of Mexico Reef Fish Shareholders Alliance. So we'll be talking all about stuff in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, my big thanks to Bob for joining us today, and we'll call it good for today.
Thanks, everybody. Good fishing out there when you get out.